Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the divisional matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals, and we got a crazy one. Ended up being a barn burner. Ravens outlast the Bengals 41-38 in overtime. This is a game that, we can start a lot of positives for the Ravens. The fact that their offense does continue to be thriving under this new sort of identity. It's prioritizing the run game, and they still had 175 yards on the ground, so that's great for them there. Did finally see Lamar Jackson have to sort of throw his way back into a game, which I have been pretty adamant in the past that people don't give Lamar Jackson the credit he deserves for being able to throw his way back into a game. But, that's what he did in this one, where the Ravens down, I believe it was 10 points in the fourth quarter, and he put together some really instrumental drives down the stretch of this game, specifically the touchdown drive towards the beginning of the quarter to knock the lead down to 3. I thought that he was unbelievable on that one. That was a methodical drive. I want to double check the yardage there, but that one was a 70-yard touchdown drive there, where Lamar was mostly doing it through the air in those situations. Something that is worth noting, at least, and not for a good or a bad reason, but just putting out the facts of, you want to talk about sort of the Derrick Henry role of what is he really in Baltimore, and he is a lead back. Very clear, though, that when they are trailing and playing from behind, game catching up on them, it's a lot less Derrick Henry, which is understandable because of his limitations in the passing game, where we had at least seen, marginal steps in the right direction. But that being said, it's pretty clear that the team favors Justice Hill in those moments, which is probably for the right. I don't know if Hill he didn't do all that much from a production standpoint, but at least worth noting in terms of, again, just this idea of what is Derrick Henry's role with Baltimore right now. And ultimately, you get to overtime, and sort of on that same note of what is Henry, he's the guy who can close the door for you. And there have been people asking questions about, well, what can this Ravens team close games? Because they had the close call against the Cowboys the week prior to that. It was letting the game slip away from them in a 2-score game in the fourth quarter against the Raiders. So there were these questions about, are the Ravens actually capable of closing the door? I don't know if we have a definitive answer to that, but in come Derrick Henry for the 51-yard run that he ripped off in overtime to be able to get the Ravens into field goal range and walk it off there. Now, walk it off there because the Bengals had possession of the ball, and it's got to be a very frustrating loss here for Bengals fans that I really do feel for you. It's Lamar Jackson not being able to corral a fumble in overtime, that getting bobbled around, the Bengals taking over the ball inside of the Baltimore 40-yard line, and they just run the ball 3 straight times because they figure they're playing for the field goal. They're going to make this an easy one, and McPherson, who is one of the better kickers in the league, is going to knock it down for them. So Joe Burrow, that's the thing is, during the fourth quarter, not great. That interception that he had that did sort of lead to the opportunity of the Ravens being able to tie the game and force it to overtime. That's a tough play that Burrow absolutely wants back, but he played more than well enough to win in this game. 30 of 39, 392 yards and 5 touchdowns, plus that final interception. They didn't even let him do anything in overtime, and I thought it was the right decision because, again, McPherson is a very reliable kicker, and that's a situation where, you feel like that should be largely automatic, but it's not a great snap. The holder ends up fumbling the ball as he goes down to place it, and McPherson ends up missing wide left. And, that sort of freak special teams play, which is ultimately, again, people want to discount special teams. A lot of time that's what it comes down to. Just ask the 49ers as well, who had their game pretty much lost as a result of special teams that they ended up crumbling here in overtime. And it's very unfortunate for the Bengals, who were a playoff contender, a potential Super Bowl contender coming into the season. And now they're sitting in a place now, a few weeks in, where, especially the last 4 weeks, I think their offense has been pretty good in large part. But their defense has just been a disaster for them up to this point in the year, where now they are in a situation where they have extremely heavy odds to overcome in order to make a real playoff run at this point. Now, they have a number of winnable games on their schedule coming out ahead here that at least now you get the Chiefs and the Ravens over with. But again, now looking back at it as well, I mean, Patriots and the Commanders appear to be a good team, but still to have that game at home and to come out short in both of those games, I mean, it is largely detrimental for them. So looking at their schedule just a little bit moving forward here, they're playing Sunday Night Football against the Giants on next week, by the way, for NBC to not flex. The Ravens-Commanders game, I think, is going to be next week's matchup. Was talked about getting that into the primetime spot. NBC wouldn't go for it. I mean, that's just a little bit diabolical in my eyes to not see them, having these two very exciting quarterbacks and Lamar and Jaden Daniels face off against each other. And now we're talking about a 2-win Giants team that is probably, better than what their record is, or worse than what their record is, and the Bengals being 1-4. And, I still think that they're a solid team overall, but playoffs feel like a huge stretch for them at this point. So, anyways, that's a whole different aside there. But for the Bengals, it is on the road against the Giants, at Cleveland versus Philadelphia. A tough one, winnable, but I don't know how much I trust this Bengals team as a whole now, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Like, at home against the Raiders is winnable, and then you have another matchup on the road against the Ravens, and then on the road again against the Chargers, and then a bye. I mean, at that point, I think realistically, those are 6 games that I just rattled off, and at that point, they'll be now 11 games into the season by the time they get to their bye week. I think that they probably have to win a minimum of 4 of those games. You probably have to win 5 of the 6. Like, there is just such little wiggle room for them at this point. And I don't know if I have the confidence level in that defense to be able to, keep them in games. Because now you look at Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow appear to be on the same page once again. And you have T. Higgins with a big-time game as well. For Chase, Chase, unbelievable. To anybody who is doubting whether or not he is still one of the elite wide receivers, 10 receptions, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns there. But T. Higgins as well, 9 catches for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. So you have both of your pass catchers back and the offense is clicking, and you still just don't have any real semblance of a defense. I saw people trying to pin it on the rushing game, which, to be fair, isn't exactly great for the Bengals, where 23 carries for 71 yards, very much lackluster. Their offense isn't the reason they lost this game. We can admit that, there are still definitely deficiencies in that running game, and maybe if it were better, they would have been able to do a better job of closing it. I do think that Chase Brown has sort of emerged as, I think he's going to be taking over the leading back spot moving forward here, but that's neither here nor there. The defense has just been absolutely brutal for them, where you look at this recent stretch of games for them where they allow 41 points to the Ravens, even last week in a win, but allowing 24 to the Panthers. Like, that's a situation where, listen, I understand that the Panthers are actually a somewhat feasible offense at this point, but definitely didn't look good in this week's game against the Bears. So, it would have been a huge statement spot for the Bengals defense to show out in that game. Instead, you allow 24 points coming off of allowing 38 to the Commanders as well. So it's a mess there for the Bengals. And again, I am still going to be a defender of Joe Burrow and that offense, because I just don't think that is the problem with this team. But that being said, this team has problems, and they have them on both sides of the ball. I don't think the offensive line exactly is all that great either. I know dealing with a couple injuries at tackle there, but this is a Bengals team that, I mean, I wouldn't bet my entire life savings against them missing the playoffs, because I still feel like they're a talented enough team, and when you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, that it's hard for me to totally count you out. But I mean, this is just getting into very dangerous territory for the Bengals, and I don't know if they are actually going to be able to recover. But I guess sort of to wrap things up, I do want to give credit to the Ravens, because that secondary, still not great. That's something that we highlighted against the Raiders when they got picked apart in the second half of that game. I would prefer to see them, play opposing offenses better. But, I mean, they do have the talent. Nate Wiggins played in this game. I thought he was all right. He is still a little bit in a bigger role than I would probably prefer him to, considering I don't think that he's extremely NFL ready up to this point. But, he's had his contributions to this secondary. But, again, I do think it's a bit of a concern. I don't know exactly what it is. I feel like they're not a bad defense in terms of applying pressure, but for whatever reason, opposing offenses are having success throwing against the Ravens right now. Something that they absolutely are going to need to correct. And, time will tell here. But let me know what your takeaways were from this game. We are going to be moving on to another one of those top AFC contenders, or at least perceived to be, in the Buffalo Bills, where once again, that Bills offense really struggled to develop all that much of a rhythm. Josh Allen finished the game, I believe it was 9 of 30. So we are going to be diving into what exactly went wrong with the Bills and, talk about their chances moving forward here, because they are in a very winnable division, but this is certainly not a winning brand of football that they've put out on the field these past couple weeks. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.